English 11, Black 3. Be good for your sub and get out your Great Gatsby and take a look at some of these moments that I'm going to point out to you. When we're done looking at chapter 3, I'm assigning you to go and read chapter 4. You want to keep in mind, too, that you need to be able to answer the questions from the study guides that I've been posting and make sure that you're reading. I had a number of students from Gold 2 who did not do well on the chapters 1 through 3 quiz because they have not been reading and they haven't been paying attention in class. So if you watch this, you'll at least do okay on the chapter 3 part. And if you've been paying attention, you should do well on everything else. So looking at chapter 39, one of the things that I want you to notice, and actually I want you to backtrack a little bit because I've got this question at the top of my page on 39 at the start of chapter 3. And I want you to be thinking about the answer to this question. What does being with Tom give Myrtle the opportunity to do? And so if you could just go back to page. How far back do we need to go? I don't think we need to go back very far. Yeah, page 36. And this is Myrtle speaking. She turned to Mrs. McKee, and the room rang full of her artificial laughter. And this is Myrtle, fake laugh. Okay, so that's a key element to that. Fake laugh, artificial laughter. My dear, she cried, I'm going to give you this dress as soon as I'm through with it. I've got to get another one tomorrow. I'm going to make a list of all the things I've got to get. A massage and a wave and a collar for the dog and one of those cute little ashtrays where you touch a spring and a wreath with a black silk bow from Mother's grave that'll last all summer. I got to write down a list so I won't forget all the things I got to do. So this, what we're getting here, okay, being with Tom allows her to be able to do these things. But there are some key elements that you want to pay attention to. This artificial laughter. She's going to give away this dress to somebody else as soon as I'm through with it. Now, Myrtle, ordinarily, would she be able to give away a dress living where she lives? She wouldn't be able to afford that. So she's going to give this dress away and then get another one tomorrow. Make a list of all the things I've got to get. A massage and a wave and a collar for the dog and one of those cute little ashtrays where you touch a spring and a wreath with a black silk bow from Mother's grave that'll last all summer. So quite a catalog of things that she has got to get. And then there's a change in the diction that's a little bit different from the rest of the paragraph. So it's been I've got to, but now there's a less educated phrasing with I got to write down a list so I won't forget all the things I got to do. So this last sentence reveals the secret of who Myrtle really is. She's not somebody who can afford ordinarily to give away her dress. And she's not somebody who can afford to get all of these things. And so the simple answer is yes, Tom gives her things. Tom allows her the opportunity, okay, being with Tom gives Myrtle the opportunity to buy things that she wouldn't ordinarily buy. But really, being with Tom gives Myrtle the opportunity to be somebody else, to pretend to be somebody who she really isn't. And that's what being with Tom provides Myrtle, okay? And that's something that you want to keep in mind. And really, one of the big reasons you want to keep this in mind is that if you have to pretend to be somebody else with the person that you're with, or with the person that you're in love with, then maybe you should rethink your relationship. All right, so next. At the start of 39, there's a shift, a verb tense shift that occurs from these opening paragraphs of Nick's narration. And I'm going to point that out to you. So there was music from my neighbor's house through the summer nights. So he's just kind of reflecting on all of the summer nights. There was music from my neighbor's house through the summer nights. In his blue gardens, men and girls came and went like moths among the whisperings and the champagne and the stars. Notice that I've got a question mark here. Men and girls. It's not men and women, it's men and girls. So there's something creepy about the people who are brought to Gatsby's parties. A woman would not show up alone. Who is it that the men are bringing? And so there's that's something that you want to be watching. Why does Fitzgerald use that word girls? At high tide in the afternoon, I watched his guests diving from the tower of his raft or taking the sun on the hot sand of his beach while his two motorboats slit the waters of the Sound, drawing aquaplanes over cataracts of foam. On weekends, his Rolls Royce became an omnibus, bearing parties to and from the city between 9 in the morning and long past midnight, while his station wagon scampered like a brisk yellow bug to meet all trains. And on Mondays, 8 servants, including an extra gardener, toiled all day with mops and scrubbing brushes and hammers and garden shears, repairing the ravages of the night before. Every Friday, 5 crates of oranges and lemons arrived from a fruiterer in New York. Every Monday, these same oranges and lemons left his back door in a pyramid of pulpless halves. Fruiterer is kind of a hard word to say. There was a machine in the kitchen which could extract the juice of 200 oranges in half an hour if a little button was pressed 200 times by a butler's thumb. At least once a fortnight, a corps of caterers came down with several hundred feet of canvas and enough colored lights to make a Christmas tree of Gatsby's enormous garden. On buffet tables garnished with glistening hors d'oeuvre, spice-baked hams crowded against salads of harlequin designs and pastry pigs and turkeys bewitched to a dark gold. In the main hall, a bar with a real brass rail was set up and stocked with gins and liquors and with cordials so long forgotten that most of his female guests were too young to know one from another. So again, this emphasis on the female guests, and it's the female guests, not the male guests, who were too young. So who is being brought to these parties? To know one from another. One of the things, again, also that you want to notice is that they're drinking a lot of alcohol, and this is the era of Prohibition. And they're drinking so much alcohol, all of these people have to know what's going on. You would imagine the police would know what's going on. And so why is nobody looking at Mr. Gatsby? So here's the tense shift. This has all been past tense, and now it becomes present. By 7 o'clock, the orchestra has arrived. No thin piece of fare, but a whole pitful of oboes and trombones and saxophones and viols and cornets and piccolos and low and high drums. The last swimmers have come in from the beach now and are dressing upstairs. So this present tense idea suggests to us that there's a shift. There's a distinct change that has occurred for this one. And so what's happening here is that Nick attends one of these parties. Okay? And so that's why we've got that tense shift. Take a look at page 41, mid-page. The party has begun. And so this second full paragraph. I believe that on the first night I went to Gatsby's house, I was one of the few guests who had actually been invited. People were not invited. They went there. They got into automobiles which bore them out to Long Island, and somehow they ended up at Gatsby's door. Once there, they were introduced by somebody who knew Gatsby, and after that, they conducted themselves according to the rules of behavior associated with an amusement park. What does that mean? Think about what that means for a minute. What is the behavior that you would associate with an amusement park? Is that good behavior or bad behavior? The last time I was at an amusement park, I was so disappointed. I don't think I'm not excited about the idea of returning to an amusement park because of how miserable the other people there made me feel. Um, People cutting in line, people just being rude to the employees who are there. People behave at an amusement park um, in their worst possible ways. Sometimes there are good experiences, but for the most part, you're at an amusement park and people are misbehaving. Um, and it's getting worse. It's getting worse and worse and worse. I don't know what it was like in the 1920s, but it's pretty terrible now. And in the 1920s, people, back in the 1950s when Disneyland opened, people were wearing like suits and fancy dresses. That certainly is not happening anymore. The rules of behavior in terms of society have changed for the worse and worse and worse and worse, especially if you look around you. So imagine what it is that Fitzgerald is saying there in the middle of page 41. There's a clever moment on page 43 that I wanted to point out. What does this mean? You've dyed your hair since then, remarked Jordan. So Jordan's talking to some girls, but the girls had moved casually on, and her remark was addressed to the premature moon, produced like the supper, no doubt, out of a caterer's basket. With Jordan's slender golden arm resting in mine, we descended the steps and sauntered about the garden. A tray of cocktails floated at us through the twilight, and we sat down at a table with the two girls in yellow and three men, each one introduced to us as Mr. Mumble. What does that mean? Mr. Mumble. Oftentimes, in our class, have had to ask people to clarify what they've said because I didn't quite understand what they said. And so that is what that means. Again, society is changing, and they are not enunciating, and so ultimately Nick has no idea really who these people are. He didn't quite hear their names because when they were introduced, their names were mumbled. At the bottom of 43, there's another interesting sort of thing that I'm curious about how you read this. So we're told this story about a woman whose dress was torn. And actually, specifically, it's Lucille's. I like to come, Lucille said. I never care what I do, so I always have a good time. When I was here last, I tore my gown on a chair, and he asked me my name and address. Inside of a week, I got a package from Crorier's with a new evening gown in it. Did you keep it? Asked Jordan. Sure, I did. I was going to wear it tonight, but it was too big in the bust and had to be altered. It was gas blue with lavender beads. $265. Imagine how much that would be worth today. There's something funny about a fellow that'll do a thing like that, said the other girl eagerly. He doesn't want any trouble with anybody. Now, how do we read this last line on the page? He doesn't want any trouble with anybody. Who doesn't? I inquired. Or, who doesn't? I inquired. How is that asked? Because the reality is, nobody wants any trouble with anybody. And so my natural inclination, the way that I hear this in my head when I'm reading it to myself, or as I read it out loud, he doesn't want any trouble with anybody. Who doesn't? I inquired. But the answer, the way he's responded to, is Gatsby. So maybe it should be read, who doesn't? I inquired. To which has responded Gatsby. But think about that. Who doesn't want trouble with anybody? I'd like to avoid trouble with other people. All right. Take a look at 44. So here we are at 44, natural progression of things. Who is this Mr. Gatsby? So this is a question that you want to be asking as we're going through. So we explored certainly who's Tom, and we've come to some answers in terms of who Tom is. He's a rather unpleasant person. We might be asking who Nick is as well, and Jordan, for that matter. But here's where Gatsby starts to come in. In the previous chapter, it was suggested that, actually, going back to chapter 1. So let's backtrack to there. In chapter 1, when Gatsby's name is mentioned, Daisy says, Gatsby? What Gatsby? So she's curious about, what does that mean? In chapter 2, there's a rumor floated that Gatsby is the nephew of Kaiser Wilhelm. And so now we get a little bit more speculation as to who Gatsby is. So at the very top of the page, Gatsby, somebody told me. The two girls and Jordan leaned together confidentially. Somebody told me they thought he killed a man once. That's interesting. A thrill passed over all of us. The three Mr. Mumbles bent forward and listened eagerly. I don't think it's so much that, argued Lucille skeptically. It's more that he was a German spy during the war. One of the men nodded in confirmation. I heard that from a man who knew all about him. Grew up with him in Germany, he assured us positively. Oh, no, said the first girl. It couldn't be that because he was in the American Army during the war. As our credulity switched back to her, she leaned forward with enthusiasm. You look at him sometimes when he thinks nobody's looking at him. I'll bet he killed a man. So this Gatsby is a mystery, even to his guests. She narrowed her eyes and shivered. Lucille shivered. We all turned and looked around for Gatsby. It was testimony to the romantic speculation he inspired, that there were whispers about him from those who had found little that it was necessary to whisper about in this world. What a complicated paragraph. It was testimony to the romantic speculation he inspired. So he inspires romantic speculation. That there were whispers about him from those who had found little that it was necessary to whisper about in this world. What does that mean? These people who are attending this party are not whisperers. They're gossipers, and they're loud gossipers. But there's so much uncertainty about who Gatsby is that they are whispering. They're not shouting it out loud. They are whispering it. And ultimately, maybe because they're afraid of something. What is it that they would be afraid of? Well, that he killed a man? Is he a spy? Who is he? We don't know. So we're going to move forward and take a look at page 45, and then we'll come back to this question. Let's see here. The bar. Here we go. So page 45, on a chance. On a chance, we tried an important-looking door. And by the way, you should be marking these moments in your book. On a chance, we tried an important-looking door and walked into a high Gothic library, paneled with carved English oak and probably transported complete with some ruin overseas. A stout middle-aged man with enormous owl-eyed spectacles. So he's a pretty infamous figure in The Great Gatsby. When people talk about The Great Gatsby, they talk about the glasses of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg, and they talk about the owl-eyed spectacled man. Was sitting somewhat drunk on the edge of a great table, staring with unsteady concentration at the shelves of books. As we entered, he wheeled excitedly around and examined Jordan from head to foot. What do you think? He demanded impetuously. About what? He waved his hand toward the bookshelves. About that. As a matter of fact, you needn't bother to ascertain. I ascertained. They're real. The books? He nodded. Absolutely real. Have pages and everything. I thought they'd be a nice durable cardboard. Matter of fact, they're absolutely real. Pages and here, let me show you. So what's kind of interesting about this is that there was a bit of a scandal, a very minor scandal, but it was somewhat scandalous nonetheless. That Bed Bath and Beyond, all those towels that you see stacked up at Bed Bath and Beyond, are not actually full of towels. They're just fronts. So they're just these towels that are folded up nice and neatly, but behind them there's like a lot of cardboard and or emptiness. There's nothing behind them. And so this guy was expecting these books to be fake. They got pages and everything. Taking our skepticism for granted, he rushed to the bookcases and returned with volume 1 of the Stoddard Lectures. See, he cried triumphantly. It's a bona fide piece of printed matter. It fooled me. This fella's a regular Belasco. So Belasco, at the time, was a famous theater producer. And so this guy is speculating that Gatsby's putting on a show. If Gatsby's putting on a show, who is he putting the show on for? And again, we want to ask the question, who is Gatsby? Okay? So this library, fascinating. And why is this guy so excited about the library? Books are expensive. Books are an opportunity to show one's wealth. And that's one of the things that you want to keep in mind. And what's for show and what isn't. Okay? Page 46, kind of near the top of the page. See that name that I've got circled and underlined? Do you know those people? You heard of them before? That family? They're from New York. So remember that. Page 47 then. We're going to move there. I was still with Jordan Baker. Okay? I was still with Jordan Baker. We were sitting at a table with a man of about my age and a rowdy little girl. And by little girl, he doesn't mean like a little girl. Nick is about 30 years old, I think we've established. And so anybody who's younger than him and behaves like they might at an amusement park, he's going to describe as a rowdy little girl who gave way upon the slightest provocation to uncontrollable laughter. I was enjoying myself now. I had taken 2 finger bowls of champagne, and the scene had changed before my eyes into something significant, elemental, and profound. At a lull in the entertainment, the man looked at me and smiled. Your face is familiar, he said politely. Weren't you in the 3rd Division during the war? Why, yes, I was in the 9th Machine Gun Battalion. I was in the 7th Infantry until June 1918. I knew I'd seen you somewhere before. We talked for a moment about some wet gray little villages in France. Evidently, he lived in this vicinity, for he told me he had just bought a hydroplane and was going to try it out in the morning. Want to go with me, old sport? Just near the shore along the Sound. What time? Any time that suits you best. It was on the tip of my tongue to ask his name when Jordan looked around and smiled. Having a gay time now, she inquired. Oh, much better, I turned again to my new acquaintance. This is an unusual party for me. I haven't even seen the host. I live over there. I waved my hand at the invisible hedge in the distance. And this man Gatsby sent over his chauffeur with an invitation. For a moment he looked at me as if he failed to understand. I'm Gatsby, he said suddenly. What? I exclaimed. Oh, I beg your pardon. I thought you knew, old sport. I'm afraid I'm not a very good host. So, we found out some information from Gatsby that he served in the American Army. So we go back to 44. He was in the American Army during the war. But we want to try to keep track of who he is. So it goes on. He smiled understandingly, much more than understandingly. It was one of those rare smiles with the quality of eternal reassurance in it that you may come across 4 or 5 times in life. It faced or seemed to face the whole external world for an instant, and then concentrated on you with an irresistible prejudice in your favor. It understood you just as far as you wanted to be understood, believed in you as you would like to believe in yourself, and assured you that it had precisely the impression of you that, at your best, you hoped to convey. Precisely at that point, it vanished, and I was looking at an elegant young roughneck. Now, a roughneck, this is interesting, and this is kind of an oxymoron. An elegant roughneck. A roughneck is somebody who works in oil, is a laborer. So somebody who, is drilling and laying pipe and all that stuff. Usually we would associate a roughneck as somebody, probably somebody in Oklahoma in this particular era. A year or two over 30, whose elaborate formality of speech just missed being absurd. And so again, this notion of words, you might think back to that passage that we looked at in chapter 3 of Myrtle, where she does not speak quite properly, as properly as she had been. I got to write down a list so I won't forget all the things I got to do. Gatsby would not let such a mistake happen. So his elaborate formality of speech just missed being absurd. Sometime before he introduced himself, I got a strong impression that he was picking his words with care. Almost at the moment when Mr. Gatsby identified himself, a butler hurried toward him with the information that Chicago was calling him on the wire. He excused himself with a small bow that included each of us in turn. Now, one of the things I want you to be thinking about is that Chicago calls. And I mentioned prohibition and all the drinking that's going on here. So you might ask yourself, why is Chicago calling? Why is Chicago calling on a weekend night, a Saturday night? Why are they calling Gatsby? So again, we're asking this question, who is he? I demanded. Do you know? He's just a man named Gatsby. Well, where is he from, I mean? And what does he do? Now you're started on the subject, she answered with a wan smile. Well, he told me once he was an Oxford man. So, a little bit more to add to your list, perhaps. A dim background started to take shape behind him, but at her next remark, it faded away. However, I don't believe it. And he's talking to Jordan here. You want to keep that in mind. Why not? I don't know. I just don't think he went there. Something in her tone reminded me of the other girls. I think he killed a man, and the effect of stimulating my curiosity, and had the effect of stimulating my curiosity. I would have accepted without question the information that Gatsby sprang from the swamps of Louisiana or from the Lower East Side of New York. That was comprehensible. But young men didn't, at least in my provincial experience, I believed they didn't, drift coolly out of nowhere and buy a palace on Long Island Sound. Anyway, he gives large parties, said Jordan, changing the subject with an urban distaste for the concrete. And I like large parties. They're so intimate. At small parties, there isn't any privacy. Well, that's weird, isn't it? So a question on the syllabus, or a thing, or not on the syllabus, on the agenda. There's something I pointed out to you that I wanted you to notice. So we've got a party here in chapter 3. There's a more small party in chapter 2, a more intimate party, but not according to Jordan in chapter 2. And another small party in chapter 1, a dinner party at the Buchanans. There isn't any privacy. Think about what occurs at those small parties. At those small parties, there isn't any privacy. We find out in the first one and hear some of the conversation in the other room between Daisy and Tom about his mistress. And then at the second party in New York, nothing happens that's a secret. It's ultimately all the drinking that enables for anybody to be able to keep a secret. But at this large party, and what's weird is she says that they're intimate. At small parties, there isn't any privacy. But at this party, Gatsby is the most private of them all, and it's at his house. And for Gatsby, it's not intimate at all. Nobody knows Gatsby. So that's a very curious kind of thing that's going on there. This irony of the parties. On page 50, a little bit more about Gatsby. Kind of a moment of characterization of him. So he's describing this music that they've just been listening to. The nature of Mr. Tostoff's composition eluded me, because just as it began, my eyes fell on Gatsby, standing alone on the marble steps and looking from one group to another with approving eyes. So he's watching over all, kind of like the eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg. His tan skin was drawn attractively tight on his face, and his short hair looked as though it were trimmed every day. I could see nothing sinister about him. I wondered if the fact that he was not drinking helped to set him off from his guests. And I think the answer to that question is yes. For it seemed to me that he grew more correct as the fraternal hilarity increased. So his not drinking allows him to be in control. Okay? So that's an important element. Miss Baker is called away to speak with Gatsby. And on page 52, she comes out. As I waited for my hat in the hall, the door of the library opened and Jordan Baker and Gatsby came out together. He was saying some last word to her, but the eagerness in his manner tightened abruptly into formality as several people approached him to say goodbye. Jordan's party were calling impatiently to her from the porch, but she lingered for a moment to shake hands. I've just heard the most amazing thing, she whispered. How long were we in there? Why, about an hour. It was simply amazing. But I swore I wouldn't tell it, and here I am tantalizing you. So many secrets. So many secrets. This car accident foreshadows a conversation that happens later on, just in a couple of pages. Okay. We get another odd shift at the bottom of page 55. We're pulled out of the narration. And Nick says, reading over what I have written so far, I see I have given the impression that the events of 3 nights several weeks apart were all that absorbed me. On the contrary, they were merely casual events in a crowded summer. And that is a lie. That's a lie. That's not true. They were not merely casual events in a crowded summer. They were important for some reason. And each one of them got their own chapter. So they were not merely casual events in a crowded summer. They were important, crucial events to our understanding what happens throughout the rest of the novel. And that's what you want to remember. Every little thing is important. And we call that kind of a meta-narrative. So he draws our consciousness back to the fact that he is writing this book. Page 57. Nick explains that for a while I lost sight of Jordan Baker, and then midsummer I found her again. At first I was flattered to go places with her because she was a golf champion and everyone knew her name. Then it was something more. I wasn't actually in love, but I felt a sort of tender curiosity. The bored, haughty face that she turned to the world concealed something. Most affectations conceal something eventually, even though they don't in the beginning. We wear masks, right? We wear masks in our everyday lives. We hide things from other people. We pretend to be people that we actually aren't. Why do we do that? Who are we? Who is Gatsby? Who is Nick? Who is Jordan? One day I found what it was. When we were on a house party together in Warwick, she left a borrowed car out in the rain with the top down and then lied about it. And suddenly I remembered the story about her that had eluded me that night at Daisy's. So let's go back to that night, page 18, and then we'll come back. There it is. I had heard some story of her too, a critical, unpleasant story, but what it was, I had forgotten long ago. So then the author and the narrator are planting seeds for us. We want to try to remember how everything goes together. There's a mystery. There's almost a mystery that we need to solve. What it was, I had forgotten long ago. Well, now he tells us. So are we going to find out what it was that Jordan found out about Gatsby on page 52? And I think we will. So, what happened? I remembered what it was. At her first big golf tournament, there was a row that nearly reached the newspapers. A suggestion that she had moved her ball from a bad lie in the semifinal round. The thing approached the proportions of a scandal, then died away. A caddy retracted his statement, and the only other witness admitted that he might have been mistaken. The incident and the name had remained together in my mind. Jordan Baker instinctively avoided clever, shrewd men. Why? Because she's a liar. Jordan Baker is a liar. She doesn't want people to know that she's a liar. So, does that explain why she doesn't think that Gatsby went to Oxford? Liars tend to be able to identify other liars. I don't believe it. Jordan Baker instinctively avoided clever, shrewd men. If she instinctively avoided clever, shrewd men, and now she's hanging out with Nick, what does that mean about Nick? Is Nick clever and shrewd? If she avoids them and she's now hanging out with them, who's Nick? And now I saw that this was because she felt safer on a plane where any divergence from a code would be thought impossible. She was incurably dishonest. She wasn't able to endure being at a disadvantage. And given this unwillingness, I suppose she had begun dealing in subterfuges when she was very young in order to keep that cool, insolent smile turned to the world, and yet satisfy the demands of her hard, jaunty body. Made no difference to me. Dishonesty in a woman is a thing you never blame deeply. I was casually sorry, and then I forgot. It didn't matter to him that she was dishonest. And then heavy, heavy sexism. Dishonesty in a woman is a thing you never blame deeply. He's maybe not as sexist as Tom, but that's a pretty sexist thing to say. Then we get this conversation. Don't forget, back on page, 53, is that car accident, okay? You're a rotten driver, I protested. Either you ought to be more careful, or you oughtn't to drive at all. I am careful. No, you're not. Well, other people are, she said lightly. What's that got to do with it? Don't keep out of my way, she insisted. It takes two to make an accident. Suppose you met somebody just as careless as yourself. I hope I never will, she answered. I hate careless people. I hate careless people. That's why I like you. Her gray, sun-strained eyes stared straight ahead, but she had deliberately shifted our relations. And for a moment, I thought I loved her. Wow, Nick, don't go down that path. This carelessness and carefulness, you get involved with her, you're not being careful. You get involved with somebody who's dishonest, you're not being careful. But I am slow thinking and full of interior rules that act as brakes on my desires. And I knew that first I had to get myself definitely out of that tangle back home. What tangle back home? What tangle back home? Oh, yeah. Back in chapter 1. Put your finger there on page 58. And go back to page 18? No, 19. There it is. Looking right at it. That's right. We heard that you were engaged. It's a libel. I'm too poor. But we heard it. We heard it from 3 people, so it must be true. Just like the internet. Is that the tango back home? Is he engaged? Is he a liar? I've been writing letters once a week and signing them Love Nick. And all I could think of was how, when that certain girl played tennis, a faint mustache of perspiration appeared on her upper lip. Nevertheless, there was a vague understanding that had to be tactfully broken off before I was free. But he seems to be in love with this girl. Is he a liar? Everyone suspects himself of at least one of the cardinal virtues, and this is mine. I am one of the few honest people that I have ever known. And back on 56, he talked about an affair. Is Nick an honest person? Who's Nick? What is this story about? Is it about the Great Gatsby? Is it about Nick? Who's who? Who's Gatsby? Who's Nick? So, here it is. The rest of your work for today. You're going to read chapter 4. Make sure that you can answer all the questions that I've posted to Canvas over the past several days. And continue to be good for your sub, please. All right, I will see you on Tuesday, and be ready for a quiz on chapters 1 through 4.